It's fine. Okay. All right, so new canvas, and topic is Raven Knight. So the challenge is I just need to quickly sketch out 2 designs kind of quickly, and then because the main focus today is actually on the rendering side. So I do love this. This is actually a sculpture, right? It's not an actual bird skull. This is already an artist stylizing it a little bit, but I am just gonna take that as a base and do my whole filter, stylize, fine edges, and just kind of turn it into a little line art for me to start. And I like this reference because it already kind of looks a little bit distorted, almost like a stylized proportion. So I love the theme of like Gothic knights and that kind of stuff mixing in with like the bone. So we're gonna keep the design quite simple. You know, nice big shoulder pads like that. So here's like a way to like kind of like try out different ways of sketching. So this right now I'm just drawing the shoulders just first, but I am thinking a little bit about the perspective, this big perspective for the shoulder pads. So I am considering to try and keep them as correct as possible. This is sketching, kind of thinking from the objects itself, but another way to draw that is quite good is to just kind of block out the whole overall silhouette like really quickly, so you get to see the whole design before you start to plonk any details there yet. So one thing I'm looking into is a kind of like a wide stance. You know, his legs kind of spread apart, you got this tiny little knight legs. And let's give him a sword. I'm honestly very out of practice when it comes to sketching. A lot of my day-to-day work is photo bashing, so please forgive me on like this is not me at my optimum, honestly. But you know, nice big fat Warcrafty shoulders, nice big chest armor, and then kind of want like his skull to be animated because it's a stylized project, so we can do that. So he's kind of raising his eyebrow like that. So let's usually while I'm sketching, I'm actually trying to figure out like a story that, you know, I could play with. This is why like actually designing NPCs or non-playable characters is way more fun, because you have every room to play with as long as you stick with the rules of the world, right? So I'm thinking his backstory is used to be a bird, got eaten by a cat maybe. You know what I mean? Yeah, so when he went to hell, like all birds do, like he bargained with the Satan or whatever you find in hell, and then say like, you know, revive me and I want to seek my vengeance or my revenge, right? So he became the Raven Knight to hunt down all the lost cats in the world. So it's just a little bit story. So you know, it's kind of like Ghost Rider meets birds, right? But it helps me out a little bit because now like I kind of have like a motif, like because I want to know simple things. Like, is he angry? Is he like, you know? So obviously he's upset, right? So that's why the whole bone motif works really well. and I can design him in a gesture that's a little bit more aggressive now because he's not happy to be where he is, right? And maybe we can think about incorporating the wings onto the armor design eventually, but um, let's test it out. So I don't like this arm pose. I'm gonna revise that. So my sketches are dominantly very, very rough, and this is how I always work, where I'm borderline scribbling, and because I'm trying to work as fast as I can. I don't want to linger too long on an idea. I want to just vomit the idea out and then look at it and see if it's worth keeping, right? And if I don't like it, erase, start again, right? That way I can cycle through many ideas quickly. So I think this new pose way better, right? Because it fits into the screen much nicer. So I'm definitely gonna keep this. This is why, like, if you quickly cycle through a lot of your experimentations fast, you can come up with a very good idea without wasting too much time. So we're gonna keep the armor quite minimal. I want to do just very chunky chainmail for this part to keep the design quite minimalist. I feel the design could use a feather, but I'm not sure where yet. So again, let's try out really quickly. New layer. Do we want to go with a centurion style? Like that's his last feather, perhaps. Or we can go like a Romeo and Juliet thing, where this is the feather of his bird wife that he can only see from afar. Yeah, so he picks up her drop feathers. Yeah, I like that. I think that's pretty cool. Because like when you draw it, right, people will ask you, right, like, hey, what's up with the thing, right? I mean, people who are inquisitive would ask you, and what, like, the bare minimum positive is like, oh wow, cool bird night, right? And that's great. But you might talk to someone who's a little bit more inquisitive. Clients tend to be like that. Art directors especially will ask you questions like this, like, oh, so what's that feather for? And saying that it's like, oh, so that's like his wife's feather and that kind of, that's a way better answer than, I don't know, I just put it there, right? Because it looks cool. So having that little dynamic is good. And I think from a design perspective, it's nice because maybe you might fight other bird knights that you failed to recruit for your endeavor, but they don't have that feather because they totally forgot about their loved ones already, like kind of like zombies. So maybe that's like an added dynamic to your story that we could play with eventually. Okay, so I like this. So this is our stylized sketch. Okay, let's jump back this. Really sorry, yeah. Like, that was so unfortunate. It didn't even recover all of the previous open tabs. How lame is that? Like, okay, I'm going to show you a different technique. I'm going to just fill this up straight. So if you don't like to use the lasso, you could technically just manually paint that in. I just find like the lasso to be a little bit more efficient, but theoretically you could just, if you like working with a brush, you could just manually paint in the values as well. It's just that what I found out is like when you do that, the painting tends to get a little bit scratchy because that's how brushwork is. You go like little bit by little bit. I like to use the lasso purely because, again, like an anime screenshot, right, you can really see the light and dark very clearly. And you can even do like just playing with levels and trying to create gradations of value. And I think this will give you a much more better control. It looks like the lighting is more consistent instead. Okay, so I'm going a little bit quicker now. Use the Lasso tool to select all of the areas that are under light. So my way of thinking for lighting is like I imagine that light is like water, like rain. So when the rain drops, right, like the rain's coming down and then dropping here, the areas that are gonna be the most wet essentially are the areas that are gonna be the brightest, because light travels like in a direction like water. So this is like a nice way to kind of understand the logic of lighting. Just imagine it that it's water instead. So you have a red light, and that means it's just red paint pouring down to your surface of the object. And if you can kind of try and think about that mindset, hopefully like your lighting will get more realistic. So honestly, you don't need many lights in your painting or in your scene. One light is more than enough to really define a shape. I'm going to pop in a texture brush now to kind of quickly get some noise going on. It's quite a generic texture, so I want to be careful to not overdo it so that it doesn't look flat, and then just going in with my brush again and just carving some of the details here to be a little bit more precise. And I'm constantly color picking my reference so that I don't deviate from the hues. So what color is present on your painting depends on the local color, which is the actual color of the object. So the local color for this skull is this very light brown eggshell color. And the second thing that defines the color is the color of the light. So because my light is a simple white light setup, it doesn't add any color value changes to the painting. This is why I highly recommend, if you're learning how to light something, learning how to paint, keep your light setup very, very simple. One light, no color, right? Just really learn to master one light source first before you start tackling a few. So I'm happy with where this is going. I'm gonna just pump it with a little bit more fine detail. This is just like to jazz up the surface a little bit, make it look a little bit more angular and stylized. So it's just a mix of lasso, color dodge, and make some of these edges really pop. And I'm kind of trying to suggest like the bird nostrils are really flared up and give him a bit more personality, like he's angry. And I want him to have a mouth and I might adjust this so that he has a corner of a mouth. This is not how real skulls work, just to let you know. But I think for a character like this, you want that look, you know, like he is angry. So one thing to take note is that it's still relatively anatomical. It's just like the shape is more stylized, the forms, but the lighting is still accurate, and I think that's like the main takeaway I want you to look into. Like, no matter what, good lighting can take you very, very far. Whether you want to be a stylized artist or a realistic one, you know, it's always try to hone into that lighting ability. Like an artist like Ryan Lung is a great person to study because his lighting is so beautiful on his character work. And he has worked on like things like Wreck-It Ralph, Big Hero 6 mainly, but currently he even did a bit of Doctor Strange as well, so he can translate to many different styles because his lighting is very strong. Okay, so I'm just kind of going back and forth here, and then I'm gonna start to put in a little bit of like personality by maybe, you know, the good old scar on the eye through a crack, right? Just to give it a bit of attitude. So this one I'm just hand painting it in, but I'm being very careful to color pick the right values for the shadow and the highlight. And we need a place to where the feather can drop, so I'm gonna break a hole into his head. Very likely this is where the cat bit into, kind of busting his brains. And I think this is it'll be nice because number one, it adds visual interest because now there's something to focus on besides his eyes. Also, we have a place to put our feather, right? So now I have like a little convenient hole to slot my feather. So I'm going to create a new layer for that. The feather is fairly stylized, so I want to keep that. I like a little bit of a blue in my Raven colors, you know, even though it's black, I do like to keep some blue in there. And for something like this, I think a little bit more color really helps out. So same thing, lasso, a little bit of values. And then what I want to suggest is like, it's actually, you know how feathers, they have that very nice soft reflection on it. So I have a whole bunch of like custom brushes here, and I think like my oil knife brush would be great for this. So I'm just going to set this to soft light. Just going to quickly block that in. So I always work like this, flat color, little bit of light, little bit of texture, and then start to build up from there. You notice I start to put my textures quite early, and then after that I start to go in and fix up the painting manually with my brush. I found this gives me the most control, and it allows me to see the picture really early. Alright, so I'm gonna take a break from that really quick, move on to the shoulder pads. So same thing, lasso out, get like a nice interesting silhouette. And let's start to bring in that metal texture, which I really wanted to experiment with. So we're going to use the same workflow with the skull, where we took a photo, mapped it on, and then blurred it a little bit. Okay, so we're not going to use the shoulder pads. We're going to use this bigger part here because it actually has more interesting textures on it, and I really like that the amount of variety of material surfaces on it. It's like a bit rough on some places and smooth on some places. So I'm going to put this aside first. And we're going to sculpt this armor. So when I mean sculpt is to establish the shadows and lights. So this part here is all going to be in shadow. This part here is going to be like a sphere. So I just need to render it like a sphere. This is important, kind of going back to your basics on how to render primitive shapes. Right, single light source, so it shouldn't be too much work. And then here, shadow, shadow, a little bit of highlight. Be as accurate as you can. It takes time to get comfortable with this, especially if you're not, if you don't practice doing this often. But it's a very, very good habit to be able to create a 3D looking form in the painting before you start applying any textures or colors. So just now I was using a burn tool, but I'm swapping to like my brush tool to kind of give it just a little bit more noise and movement, because sometimes the dodge tool gives you like a pretty flat result, which might not be the nicest. So I kind of like this really random brush strokes that kind of give it a little bit more character. Okay, gonna use the dodge tool. I love the dodge tool at the end to just kind of crank up the values for the places that I think needs a little bit more bump, a little bit more juice. So just kind of crank these up. You kind of see like the armor is really starting to take shape in terms of lighting, right? So it needs to look good here first. If you can't get the 3D shape to work right, no matter what texture you apply, it's not going to help it a lot, honestly. So I can start to introduce my texture. Like I said, all I really wanted was just a little bit of that noise, and I do think this texture might be a little bit too low res for my needs, but let's just see how we can play with it. Yeah, it's very, very low. Let's try with a bit of like soft light. It's actually a very good texture. It's just unfortunate that it's so pixelated. So what I'll do is try with a bit of surface blur, see if I can save it. Yep, that surface blur does help a little bit. Because what I really want is that blotchiness, that randomness that a photo can give me. Because it's very hard to paint randomness, to be honest, because it requires quite a bit of calculation for it to happen. So photos are great for that because they solve a lot of these problems for you. So with and without is really just to kind of give you that randomness that I like. And also you can kind of see there's a lot of nice happy accidents with the browning. I'm going to apply an Unsharp Mask now. I like Unsharp Mask because it gives me more control about how much I want to sharpen. Do I want a lot, do I want a little? So I'm going to put a little bit here. I like how this is looking. I'm going to go back with my brush and fine tune this edge a little bit more. Maybe I can suggest that this is a crack and a hole, so I need to add more value so that it looks like it's 3D and there's a edge to it. And also I want to fix up some of this because the lighting is starting to get like here way too dark, right? So let's bring in some values back again. You can kind of see the texture going a little bit crazy here, which I don't want. So this is why I use pictures, because if I paint everything, it's going to take too much time and I might not get like happy accidents or randomness from a photo. If I use only photos, what's going to happen is going to look like a matte painting, or it's going to look very, very bad. It doesn't look nice, right? Because once you use all photos, you have zero control as an artist anymore, right? So you need to find like a happy medium between the two techniques. And this is where like the painting really starts to come to life, because people can't see anymore like where is the photo and where is your paint. And I think that's like a very nice outcome. So just going with my various texture brushes and trying to like flesh out some of these areas a little bit more. Basically, I want to make it look like it's a slightly older piece of armor. Lighting here is a little bit imprecise, so unprecise, sorry. There we go. Okay, this is good enough. All right. Gonna cheat a little bit. Merge this guy. We got no time already. This is ridiculous. That's the thing about hand painting anything. Even if you hand paint a little bit, it still takes forever though. So you notice I'm trying to hide this hole because it's not supposed to be on both sides. So that's possible. A little bit of light. Yeah. Fix that shape. Okay. Cut this guy out. Bring this over here. That saves me a good 30 minutes. Where's my skull? There we go. Okay. Hold on. Okay. Just rearranging my layers just now. So this is the shared texture. So I do this a lot. Like once I paint something, I try to only paint something once. You know, I try to avoid having to repaint anything. Different people have different standards of what they call like art, but for me, art is about getting the picture done. I'm not really trying to showcase my skill or anything. I'm just trying to get my job done. And so anywhere that I can find ways to speed up my work, I'm going to take that route very likely. So I love the idea of just repeating and sharing and trying to make the most out of your painting. And with the newer Photoshop tools, I mean, their warp tool is amazingly stable, amazingly powerful. You don't lose much resolution as well if your painting is high res enough. and you can get a lot done. So what is important is to always check your perspective. So I'm using my original sketch. It's still very valuable for me to make sure that I don't warp a texture up to the point where it's wrong in the sense of perspective. So that sketch is still very, very useful. And I'll work on the silhouette just a little bit, give it a little bit more character. So I'm just gonna hide my tracks a little bit, by painting over. All right, shoulder done. Next is chest armor, and again I'm just gonna repeat this because seriously, there's like no point. All right, chest armor a little bit more different because I want to get that fold in the middle, like how the chest is a V, right, like that. So again, using the warp tool. I love this tool. Get that in there. Put it underneath the skull. Flip it to the other side. Okay, now this is where it gets tricky because if you don't do this right, people will see it and then they will say that you're a lazy artist. But if you do it right, then people say you're a good artist. It's very strange, right? Because ultimately, like you should be lazy because you're trying to speed up your work, right? So we got our base material done, and this is great because like the material is very consistent. Obviously the lighting is wrong, right? So that's something that we'll fix right now. It's way too bright, right? Because this value was meant for the shoulder armor, not the chest armor. Okay, so because it's way in the shadow, it shouldn't share the same values as the shoulder, first one. So I'm just going to drop the overall value. I'm also going to tweak the values of the shape of it. So this part here shouldn't be bright. It should be equally dark as the other side. So let's tweak that. And this part here, because now it's almost like a curved cylinder, it should have more consistent value here. So I'm going to use the airbrush instead and just color pick the middle tone and just redo a little bit of the shape here. So this is much closer to how it should be, right? So take note that I'm only looking at this like this. I'm just looking at the shape here, right? I'm not worried about the cast shadow from the beak yet. I'm just trying to make this part look correct in space. Okay, so now that it's starting to read better, I can start to apply the same textures that I have on the other side. I'm just going to hand paint it this time. We're not going to actually texture bash it. So just kind of make it look crummy. I am going to add a lip. So a lip is something like this. So you imagine that this is a piece of metal and then you're just kind of folding it. So when you fold it, it's going to face the light more. So it's going to be a brighter material. Okay, now I can start to work in the lighting. And normally, cast shadows, I like to do on a separate layer just in case, because sometimes I like to move the position of the head and stuff like that. So I would just use a lasso, and basically this is the cast shadow from the shoulder pad and the skull, and a little bit here. So I would add Shift F6 to feather it a little bit, bring up my airbrush, take a dark value, and basically just like softly airbrush the shadow in, taking into consideration that, you know, the nearer the object is, the darker the shadow. The nearer the object is, the darker the shadow, right? So you're gonna get something like that. Pretty convincing shadow cast, and I like to use it as a separate layer just to be safe, because sometimes I want to tone it down, sometimes I want to crank it up. I do change my mind quite a bit for when it comes to this kind of things. So now the new armor sits pretty well with respect to everything else. This area here, this little nugget of light, I really want to pop it. All right, so just use the dodge tool and just kind of really give it a little bit of shine. I want a little bit of shine here as well. I call this like a hot spot. Your painting should kind of always have like a nice little hot spot that really showcases the shape. Chest armor looking good. We are officially over time. How is everyone doing? Okay. Do you mind we just like drag on a little bit today? Okay. I'm gonna work as fast as I can. So I'm gonna make the head just a little bit brighter, a little bit more low-key, because it's starting to share the same values as the armor, which I don't want. And I really wanted the skull to be a bleach white look, so it'll be a nice contrast with the rest of the armor, which is going to be quite dark metal. Okay, so shoulders done. Very likely this I can use for the feet, so because it's a very similar material. And this is also like the benefits of just keeping your lighting very minimal, one light. I'm gonna use a smudge tool. I hope it doesn't break the PC. Alright, that's pretty stable. Just kind of smear that value so I get consistent. I don't have to color pick too much. You can still paint it if you want, but that's just a nice little trick to kind of get it out quickly. When it comes to this business, like every second counts, so any trick that we can employ to just speed up a little bit more and still keep it accurate, we'll always try to use. So just a little bit of light on the feet. I'm not going to put too much detail on the leg armor, just keep it very minimal. And what I'll do is see if I can salvage this guy and bring it across. Like I said, I try not to paint anything twice unless I absolutely have to. I think this time I might change my techniques a little bit and go with a flat color because I think it's easier. And let's see if I can save this. Alright, let's grab this. Do the same thing we did with the chest. Warp one side. You kind of see it clearly here what I'm doing. Flip it to the other. And warp it so that the perspective lines up, because it's not meant to be a perfect symmetry on the drawing, but obviously the boot itself is symmetrical. So a little bit of paint. Let's kind of revise the drop shadow here. Oops. A little bit of paint. Fix up the directional light here, so just a little bit more, a little bit touch, right? A little bit of love. Here's another trick, stamp tool, very useful. Quickly adds back like what works from your previous painting, previous section of your painting onto whatever you've done now. It's a great way to, without spending too much time, maintain some kind of visual consistency. Okay, feet done. Let's go back to the chest. I noticed like the value is a little bit light. I want a bit more high contrast. Okay, can I just do this? I think I can. Let's try. I think it'll be quite nice, so make it look like a leaf or I just need to do adjustment, shadow and highlight, get rid of that highlight because it shouldn't even be there, right? Because this is under shadow. And basically we're gonna remove all of the contrast and decrease the overall value because it shouldn't have any, shouldn't have that much light contrast on it anyway because it's under shadow. Go. So now it's sitting in place. So good lighting or good understanding of lighting goes a long way. Oh dear. I lost my drop shadow. Isn't that weird? Yeah, that is very weird. Huh. Let me redo it really quickly. I don't know why that happened. Very strange. But at least I get to show it to you twice, so I think that's alright. Okay, set it to multiply. When you set it to multiply, it's going to increase the values quite a bit stronger, so if you think it's too much, then you can just go with the brightness and like that. Okay, moving quickly. Next part, arms. Chainmail, gonna start with a very dark color. And you know what? I'm just gonna quickly move on to the legs as well. One shot. All of this will just be one big blocky value. Okay, Okay, so you can see the painting start to take life a little bit. It's a little bit too saturated. I'm gonna desaturate a little bit. Some parts should be black, so I'm just gonna make those black using the burn tool. So because this material, I don't want a very high key contrast, meaning that it's not going to have as much contrast as metal, but I do want to define the shape a little bit. So I'm going to feather select and just using my mid-tone, just very gently kind of add just a little bit of extra value in between. Not as much as the metal because I don't want it to be reflective looking. That's really it, actually. So, a bit of my chalky brush. Offset some of this a little bit. Oops. So, bottom part is leather. I'm going to use my magic wand. I like using my magic wand to quickly select stuff. Let's add a little bit of texture. And just kind of add a little bit of dirt there, right? Just to give it a bit more character. You kind of see what's it doing. It's a little bit too sharp, the lines here, so just using my smudge tool, kind of blur off some of that lasso marks, right? So just a little bit of definition, not too much, something to kind of suggest that this is leather instead. Alright, let's do the chainmail. I'm going to design a flat texture. Normally I'll use a photo texture, but because this is a stylized cartoon, a stylized piece of art, I actually think like drawing the chainmail manually is better. It sounds like a lot of work, but it's really not. And it's going to be very chunky anyway, so don't worry too much about it. I am going to, and I actually learned this from like a Ronja. Yeah. And I was like, oh yeah, that is a good idea. And so this is just a very base light pass, you know, a little bit of light at the top, a little bit of shadow. Oh, you can see it. Let's make it a bit smaller. Nothing too super fancy, you know, just really one stroke to suggest the light part on the rim. And then maybe another at the bottom. Doesn't take you more than 5 minutes, honestly, but it's very tedious. So, but I like how like you only have to really paint it once, and you can pretty much reuse it for future projects as well. I'm going to modify it and just you know, like use a little bit of dodge on some of the parts as well. And then I'm going to take this value and basically just do a sharpened version. My dyslexia is kicking in, so it's hard for me to remember which is up and which is down. But I think at a certain point, as long as you have enough visual complexity, you get like about 50% of them correct, I think we should be good. Okay, that's good enough. So pop that in here. Let's wrap it around the arm. what is important is that you have the correct distortion when you wrap something around a cylinder. So the circles around the edges will no longer be circles, but they'll be ovals, and they should be more compressed, and this should give us a sufficient illusion that this is a chainmail wrapping around. So the reason why I pre-painted it a little bit, because it saves me some time overall, and the reason why I don't paint it too much, because I am supposed to go in and manually clean up. So remember how I said like light works like water falling onto a surface? So it's the same thing here, right? Any place that the water cannot touch becomes shadow. So all of this bottom parts here should be in some kind of shadow. And you only need to really suggest a little bit of chainmail. You don't have to paint every single loop, but some areas you just put a little bit more love and care, and it will trick the eye into thinking that everything is rendered. Just a little bit like that. I don't like how it's brown, so I'm going to desaturate it and kind of keep it gray. So other arm, duplicate, flip. You know the drill already by now. So you notice it's not that great yet because the silhouette of the arm is not representing the chainmail that well yet. So I'm gonna have to go in, modify it a little bit. This is kind of like that little bit of detail that you want to take care of even though you're doing something stylized. If you want to go the extra mile, some places just cut in like a hole to suggest that it is a loop mail instead. So really not much work, but it goes a long way, just those few little holes cut in. Okay, actually we're almost done. Just left the sword and the hands, and then maybe a little bit of final finesse work. So really lazy to paint the hands right now. So I'm just going to stamp tool the skull there. And then what I did was I just found a section that sort of looks like a hand on the skull. Just kind of like muddle that in. So I'm just getting the silhouette right. That one I'm taking care. But aside from that, it's basically just once the brain sees the same values, it automatically kind of can fill up the gaps itself. So you don't really have to, with the time that we have, I'm not going to render everything out. Probably what I'm going to do is also just add like a little flap here. Right? I think that will make sense. So the flap I'm going to take from the leather. So it's the same material. That is also good because it's easier to paint and I don't need to worry about the hand, so save me some time. Okay, and then you know what? This is a stylized thing. I love adding stitches. Stitches are great. It really kind of gives the design a little bit more life. So you notice I'm kind of painting it And I'm not just drawing one straight line. That's never too nice. So I'm actually painting in, and I'm even considering, like, you know, how it changes the surface of the leather and how the light will bounce into it. So that little bit of detail kind of adds on. And for the stitch itself, I'm going to paint one piece. I'm going to paint one piece, really give it like a little bit of TLC, you know, and just add a little bit of like very generic, I call it like generic drop shadow, generic lighting. Duplicate. Alright, and then now you got like an X thing. And a little bit more love there. So now I have I can just kind of populate the stitches with this texture. Let's randomize it a little bit, right? Like that. So this is being smart about the way you work, right? Like, we don't try not to paint everything. See where you can cut corners. So I'm going to randomize it a little bit so it looks like they're different. So it's nice. It looks like I hand painted everything. I'm going to merge it and match the shadow from the pants. Right, that looks good. I definitely like the way that looks. Okay, sword. I am not going to even bother to paint the sword. It is a waste of my time. I remember there was a really good, I think the guy was holding a sword. Yeah, I love this. This is a beautiful sword. Okay, so if you're using a photo texture on a stylized drawing, like I'm doing right now, please remember that, you know, it's your world is stylized, so you still want to distort your, well, not like that, sorry, but you just want to make sure it matches your drawing shape, right? And then make sure you apply like a surface blur, because you don't want that photo texture look, right? So surface blurs are great. Like, you see, this is before and this is after. It actually takes out all the unnecessary stuff, and you can adjust it, and it'll gradually become more smooth. It is a rather heavy operation. You can see like the PC struggling now. But it basically keeps only the shadow and light information, but gets rid of all the texture. So it's perfect. It makes things look stylized. It shouldn't be yellow. So now I need to, because I'm a thief, right? So I need to cover my tracks. So I'm gonna go in and pretend like I painted this and just kind of. I also want to introduce some of that, like a little bit of like my own textures. So this is the, oh no, I shouldn't use a flat color like that. This is gonna be the cat slayer blade. It's like gonna be a pussy slayer. Shit. I learned this. I was studying my friend Jeremy Chong's painting, and if you can follow him on ArtStation, is an amazing illustrator. He does a lot of this very beautiful metal armor, and how, because we used to work together at Lemon Sky, and then he would select an edge like this, and then kind of just add very fine changes in stroke, I notice. And kind of like keep repeating this layer after layer and section after section, even like on a small piece of armor. And sometimes he'll even mix like a little bit of color, like a little bit of cyan, a little bit blue in the mid-tones. And it really creates this very beautiful metal effect, you know. If you study his paintings, you go online, you search, I think he goes by either Mixed People, MIXPPL, or Jeremy Chong, and then you can see like he does this really well. Alright, so add a bit of hot spot. Let's see, how can I do the sides here? You know, I'm just gonna paint it. Let's not be too lazy. Okay, simple. Light values. Dark values. More dark values. Shadow. Finally, add a little bit more light value. Same here, lasso, light value. A little bit too light, let me tone that down a little bit. Okay, so we're very close to finish. Right now it's just finishing touches, presentation, yeah. Let's hide that, the sketch of ours. Okay, so what I noticed, or I've learned that one thing that really makes an artwork stand out is the usage of bounce light. Not many people employ it because it's actually quite challenging to do it right. You don't have to do it if you're not comfortable, but this is like, try it out, right? So light goes down, bounces off the sword, it should hit this chest armor a little bit. Bonus points if you can be daring and, you know, mix up the colors a little bit. Okay, a little bit of bounce light here as well. You notice I'm doing it on a separate layer because this is quite tricky and you don't want to overdo it, right? Second is like bounce light from the floor, right? You have to remember as the light hits the floor, say something like this, we have a spotlight, right? Spotlight is going to touch the floor. Our character will cast a shadow, so we're going to just create a really quick shadow. I do it using a lasso. You can paint it on. Oh, here's a very nice technique I learned from Aaron Beck. Quite clever actually. He draws the shadow like a pure top view. You know, like imagine you're looking at your character from the top and you're just drawing your character from the top. So you got very big shoulders here, shoulders here. The arms are coming out a little bit. This arm is in front. Oh, I think my PC. Yeah, this arm is in front, and then you got the sword. Let's do the sword, something like that. And I think you can, oh dear, you can just see the feet maybe in between the beak, right? Let's say this is the pure top view shadow. Makes sense, right? Right, just on the top. Fill it with the shadow color. And warp it onto the bottom. It's like stupidly effective. Because I've been doing it manually for a very long time. And it's sadly like this is even nicer when I even try to do it properly. It takes a little bit like finessing, and sometimes you have to fake it a little bit, like I got the feet wrong. So, but it's, you know, it's okay, and this is really pretty nice for that little work, right? So clean it up a little bit, and you got all this, like especially the feet. The feet is the one that you want to really take care of because. Okay, so that's done, right? And this is probably a little bit more in front here. Okay, so I like to stick with black, all right, and here's what I'll do. I'll add like a little bit of motion blur. I won't keep it so full. Just a little bit of motion blur to soften it a little bit. You might have to experiment which direction works better for you. And then I'll set it to multiply. And I won't play with the opacity. I do it a different way. I use lightness. So I'll make it quite light, like that, up to the point where I think it works overall. And then the reason why it's actually a lighter value now, because I can use the dodge and burn tool, and I can just burn in that subtle, softer shadows in between. And I can dodge areas that I don't want the shadow to be so extreme. Usually at the back, you want the shadows to be a little bit lighter. Right, so you have way more freedom using that. Okay, so he really looks like he's sitting in the painting, which is great. That's what you want. Fixing the shadow here. Didn't realize I paint this on one layer. Last is a little bit of a drop shadow for this feather. And same thing, set it to multiply. But what I'll do is like, especially things that are translucent, the color of the shadow takes a little bit the color of the object itself that's blocking it. So it's like a nice little detail that you can try and add in. So you just see a little bit of blue there, right? Just darken that so people will look at that hand. And all right, we forgot to fix the lighting on the shoes. Actually, the boots, they're really off at the moment. Just need to darken this guy and darken this guy, and here. Okay, Shift F6, soften it. Okay, so the last remaining bit of bounce light, which what I was trying to say was, because you have light hitting the ground and bouncing back up, so it's going to go down and bounce back up, you want to suggest just a little bit of light hitting some of these parts. It's a very subtle gesture, but it does, if you look at more professional work or experienced painters, they always put this in, and I found that it really helps. It's like that missing juice that makes a painting feel realistic versus very fake. And so if your ground is brown, then the bounce light is going to appear very nice orange. If your ground is green like grass, then your bounce light is going to be green and yellow. That's why you look at some paintings or photos and you see like, how come like the armor, why does gray armor have so many color and that kind of thing? It's because it's actually getting a lot of bounce light from its surrounding elements. And that's actually what makes metal look so visually interesting, because it technically doesn't have a color, it just reflects the color around it. Okay, the skull is great, but very, very boring, because it's the first one I did, so it's a bit loose. And I'm not gonna bother to paint the details, so I'm just gonna use fine edges. It's another old trick of mine. I can have either a choice of the first layer I will multiply, so you get some free lines in there. Second layer, I am going to screen this in, so we just get a little bit more bonus lines in there. And then filter, sharpen, unsharp, and I really want to crank up that micro textures so that it just looks like nice and bony. I wish I could spend more time. I really want to tighten that up, but yeah, we're a little bit way overdue. Okay, let's hide everything else for our presentation shot. I always like to add a very atmospheric look to it, so let's use a color dodge. Soft brush, and let's just put in, I like to use orange for my blue. It's a little bit strong now, but don't worry about it. I like to just put it strong first so I can actually see where the bloom is. And then what I'll do is I will desaturate it a little bit, and then maybe just try out different combinations. So there we go, the values were way off. last bit touches, lens correction, a little bit of chromatic aberration, a little bit of distortion sometimes help, but not so much, and then a bit of vignette. I do like this for this kind of work. I also do another Unsharp pass. If you notice, like the radius is set really low and then the amount is maximum because it actually just sharpens up the edges and it's great for most work. Also, it's worth testing out the auto tone. Sometimes it helps. Auto contrast, that looks good. Auto color also looks good. Yeah, it's quite nice. Auto tone, I think, is quite nice actually. Let's see, what did it do? It made it a bit warmer, right? But I think this one is fine. Yeah, so that's it. All right, so this is like a good base painting. I would work really fast to get the painting to this level, as fast as I can. And then after I'm happy with it, then I'll go in and you can see because a lot of the detail is still missing. And then that final detail is just the bonus part. That is what like kind of elevates it, but you want to work hard to get it to this level first. Okay, so I'm sorry that I couldn't finish the other one. Maybe we can do that next week. Yeah, for a more realistic demo.